The cockpit was a furnace of alarms and flickering red light. Ravik Kale's hands were welded to the flight controls, muscles locked in defiance against the ship's violent shudder. Blood trickled from a gash above his brow, tracing a jagged line over the ridged scar across his cheek before, disappearing into the collar of his scorched suit. The canopy was a warped sheet of heat-streaked glass, framing a sky that seethed with rolling clouds of black ash and veins of molten orange. Somewhere deep in the hull, a plasma conduit screamed before tearing itself apart in a blossom of white fire. His breath came sharp, measured, each inhale tasting faintly of metal and burning plastic. Then the voice came, a ghost dragged across broken comms. "Sorry, Ravik, we can't let you live." It was cold, too calm, and carried the weight of an execution already decided. A second later, the starboard wing bloomed in a burst of superheated vapor as a plasma slug tore through composite and alloy, spinning the craft into a gut-twisting roll. The inertial dampeners failed with a shriek, slamming him sideways against the harness. He gritted his teeth, not against the pain. Pain was an old companion, but against the betrayal in that voice. The craft's nose pitched toward the planet below, Volcaris Prime, the surface a living nightmare. Seas of molten rock shifting in slow, viscous waves, mountain ridges coughing fire into a sky thick enough to choke light. To navigation. AI stuttered warnings in a voice that trembled between system failure and surrender. Hull breach imminent. Impact in 23 seconds. Recommend immediate. The rest dissolved into static. Ravik's hands snapped switches in rapid sequence, but the thruster spat only brief blue ghosts before dying entirely. Gravity claimed him. The ship corkscrewed through the upper haze, and he bled into the cockpit until sweat stung his eyes. Through the forward canopy he saw the fractured crust of the planet's surface giving way to a caldera the size of a city, its heart a roiling lake of fire. For a moment the beauty of it, violent, unending, was almost enough to pull him from the chaos. Then the first shockwave hit. The craft's spine broke with a sound like a bone snapping, and everything after that became velocity and noise. Panels ripped free, cables whipped, the harness bit into his ribs hard enough to bruise. The AI's dying breath was a hollow whisper. 12 seconds. He didn't wait for 0. Fingers flew over the emergency release. The canopy burst, and the rush of superheated air clawed at him as he launched from the seat. The ejector's thrusters fired weakly, designed for atmosphere, not volcanic hellscapes, and he felt himself dragged toward the molten sea below. The heat was a living thing, wrapping around him, trying to seep into the seams of his armor. Impact was a violent kiss of force and steam as he slammed onto an outcropping of basalt jutting from the molten lake. Like the spine of some dead leviathan, his boots hissed against the stone. The suit's heat shielding screamed warnings. He forced himself upright, one knee sinking into the brittle rock, lungs dragging in air that smelled of sulfur and ash. Behind him, the remains of a ship met the lava in a detonation that punched a column of fire and debris hundreds of meters into the air. For a heartbeat, the shockwave silenced the world. Then came the sound, deep, resonant, not from the planet, but from something that owned it. He turned slowly, every instinct sharpening. Through the curtain of rising steam a shape emerged, massive, deliberate. First the eyes, two burning coals set deep in armored ridges, scanning him with the intelligence of an apex predator. Then the maw, parting just enough to let a shimmer of superheated air escape. Vents along its throat pulsed with the promise of flame. Pyraxis, king of fire. Its scales were black glass edged with molten seams, every movement trailing embers. It stepped forward, the basalt trembling under its weight, and Ravik could feel the heat pushing against him, testing the limits of his suit. Neural overdrive flared at the edge of his mind, his ability reacting instinctively, tuning itself to the pulse of the creature's presence. Threads of alien emotion brushed against his consciousness, wariness, pain, a memory of chains biting into flesh. But there was no time to reach deeper. Pyraxis lowered its head slightly, jaws parting in a low, rumbling growl that rolled through the ground and into Ravik's bones. Not an attack, a warning. Shadows swept across the ridge. Ravik lifted his gaze, his visor darkening automatically against the glare above. Cutting through the ash clouds came 3 Syndicate huntercraft, their angular hulls glinting like obsidian knives in the dying light. Their engines screamed in perfect formation, descending in a slow spiral that promised death. Through the neural static, Ravik caught a flicker from Pyraxis' recognition, and hate sharpened to a killing edge. The creature's growl deepened, building toward something that could shatter the sky. Ravik's own pulse matched it. His mind ran through the calculus. 3 hunters, 1 half-functional suit, and a living weapon in front of him that could just as easily turn him to ash. His fingers twitched toward the neural sync module on his wrist, the one that could bridge the gap between man and beast for better or for far worse. He took 1 step closer, boots cracking the thin crust of cooling basalt. "Looks like we both got problems," he said quietly, knowing Pyraxis couldn't understand the words but might feel the intent behind them. Above, the hunters broke formation, the lead ship's forward cannons spooling with light. The ash thickened, turning the world into a dim, rust-colored storm. Pyraxis's throat began to glow, the heat shimmering around it like a mirage. Ravik drew in a slow breath, locking eyes with the beast. In the roar of the planet and the shriek of engines, he could already hear the question forming in his mind. Cold and sharp as the betrayal still bleeding inside him, was this where he died, or where he started the war? The basalt ridge under Ravik's boots radiated heat that pressed through his armor like a slow, relentless hand. Every step away from the molten shoreline was a negotiation between exhaustion and the planet's hostility. The air was thick with sulfur, each breath filtered through his helmet's scrubbers tasting faintly of charred metal. Far above, the sky churned in bruised shades of black and red, thunderless yet alive with the low hum of volcanic pressure. He moved without wasted motion, eyes sweeping the terrain, mind mapping every fissure, every spire of cooling rock that could offer shelter before the next eruption. The AI in his helmet pinged quietly, reading the shifting heat patterns ahead. "Caution," it murmured, its voice a calm counterpoint to the searing world around him, seismic activity increasing within a 2-kilometer radius. Ravik ignored the warning. He'd heard worse, and Volcara's Prime was nothing if not consistent in its intent to kill. Everything on its surface. He needed high ground, a vantage point, and more than he wanted to admit. Time to think. His thoughts kept circling back to the betrayal. Not the ambush in orbit. He'd expected syndicate treachery. But the voice in the calm, one of his own. They'd fought together, bled together, and when the moment came, they'd chosen the payout over him. The ridge narrowed, forcing him to pick his way across jagged rock slick with heat shimmer. He dropped to one knee to steady himself, gauntlet brushing the stone. Something rough caught under his glove. He brushed away the thin crust of ash to reveal a deep gouge burned into the basalt. Not natural. Too uniform, too deliberate. He scraped further, revealing the full shape, a link of chain fused into the rock itself. The metal was blackened to the point of becoming part of the stone, but its pattern was unmistakable. "Analyze," Ravik said quietly. The AI took less than a second. Material composition, high-tensile alloy, reinforced for thermal endurance. Estimated melting point exceeded by Volcaris lava flows only under extreme pressure. "Meaning," he pressed. "Meaning," the AI said. "This chain was forged to restrain something capable of surviving this environment." Ravik ran a finger along the charred link, noting the stress fractures spiderwebbing through it. "Any signs of when?" "Based on thermal degradation, I would estimate years, perhaps decades. Dull traces of biological matter remain fused in the microfractures." He glanced up, scanning the horizon. The memory of those burning eyes and the weight of Pyraxis' stare pressed on him. He'd seen predators in 100 forms, but this one had been chained here. His jaw tightened. "Do you nicht jo fa shin vichina ting ba ha ha keo da?" "The AI!" said suddenly in its auto-translate mode, glitching into his native tongue. He smirked faintly at the bug. "Then it knows what betrayal feels like." He straightened, taking in the terrain again. There were more marks, scorched furrows in the stone, each wide enough to have been carved by a talon the length of his forearm. The pattern told a story. An immense creature tethered here, straining against its bonds, each attempt answered with force. He could almost hear it, the echo of chains pulled taut, the sound of rage denied release. He knew that sound. The memory rose unbidden years earlier on the outskirts of Vega 4. A syndicate strike team had breached the colony walls. He'd been there with the Alliance's Shadow Division, deep insertion, zero civilian visibility. Orders were clear. Extract key personnel, eliminate all hostile presence. He'd done both, but the mission had soured when he'd stumbled on crates marked with both the Alliance crest and the Syndicate's Sunspike insignia, weapons, tech, blood, money proof that the two enemies were feeding each other behind closed doors. He brought the evidence to his commander. Hours later, his own team's rifles were pointed at his back. The only reason he'd lived was because he'd triggered neural overdrive, flooding them with their worst battlefield memories, buying seconds to vanish. But survival had come with a price. He'd carried their screams in his head ever since. A tremor shivered through the ground, snapping him back to the present. Pebbles danced along the ridge and skittered into the glowing fishes below. Ravik scanned upward. The sky's haze parted just enough to show the silhouette of a distant caldera, its rim jagged and steaming. He adjusted course. As he moved, his eyes kept pulling back to the chain embedded in the rock, as if it were some kind of gravestone. "AI," he said, "give me a map overlay. Mark this location." "Marked," it confirmed. "Reason? Because I think," Ravik said, "this is where it started for the king of this place." The climb toward the caldera rim was slow, each step testing the armor's temperature limits. His visor's display flashed heat warnings like a persistent heartbeat. Still, the higher he climbed, the better he could see the sprawl of Vulcaris, the rivers of magma threading between, black plateaus, the bursts of fire geysers lighting the horizon. Beautiful in a way that only things built to kill could be. He stopped halfway up to catch his breath, leaning against a spire of basalt. The stone burned against his shoulder plate. "You're overheating," the AI warned. "Find shelter." "Not yet," Ravik said. He looked back down the slope, eyes narrowing. Something had changed in the air, a shift in pressure, a deeper timbre beneath the volcano's constant growl. "You hear that?" Audio sensors detect low-frequency resonance. "Source unknown." Ravik's fingers tightened around the grip of his sidearm. "Not unknown," he murmured. "Just uninvited." He reached the top of the ridge and dropped into a crouch, scanning. The basin beyond was a scar of blackened stone, its center occupied by a pool of lava that moved like a slow, breathing thing. Across its edge were more signs, claw marks, grooves, or something massive at pace, over and over, bound to a single point. He imagined Pyraxis here, wings folded, muscles tense, eyes locked on the horizon it could never reach. The rage of that captivity hummed faintly against his neural senses like heat through glass. He pulled back from the edge. The AI spoke again, its voice stripped of tone. "We should move. Remaining here increases the probability of detection." "Good," Ravik said. "Let them detect us." He started down the other side, scanning for an overhang or a cave to rest in. Somewhere he could plan, heal, and decide whether Pyraxis was going to be his executioner or his weapon. The ridge narrowed into a jagged funnel of black stone, its edges fractured from centuries of molten tides. Heat shimmered upward in visible waves, distorting the view ahead. Ravik adjusted his footing, scanning the ground for fissures, but his visor's readout flickered with a sudden spike in thermal variance. The AI's voice cut through the static in his ear. "Warning, localized heat surge, 200 meters ahead. Pattern suggests." The rest of the sentence was drowned beneath a roar that shook the air like the planet itself was bellowing. Dust and ash rained from the cliffs above. Ravik froze, his instincts sharpening into stillness. From the haze ahead, a shape emerged, massive, deliberate, and far too quiet for its size until the final step. Pyraxis. Up close, the beast's presence was overwhelming. Its armored scales were obsidian streaked with molten seams that pulsed like veins of fire. Eyes burned gold red, locked on him with a predator's certainty. Heat rolled from its body in waves that made his armor's cooling system whine in protest. The AI's tone flattened into urgency. "Recommendation, immediate retreat. Proximity is lethal." Ravik didn't move. The ground trembled under Pyraxis' approach. Then, without warning, the creature's chest expanded, vents along its flanks flaring open. A torrent of flame erupted, cutting the air in a horizontal sweep. Ravik dove sideways, the blast searing the edge of his armor. The basalt where he'd stood cracked apart, molten light spilling from the wound in the earth. He landed hard, rolled, came up with his rifle raised, then lowered it. A shot would be nothing but noise against something that had lived in fire. Pyraxis turned, talons carving furrows in the rock. Ravik's mind raced. Fight and die, or try something far more dangerous. His thumb brushed the neural sync module on his wrist. He'd used neural overdrive on men, machines, even smaller predators, but never on something this massive. "AI," he murmured. "Engage link mode, maximum range." "This is inadvisable. Neural overload could." "Do it." The world tightened into a tunnel as he opened the connection. A surge hit him, heat, pain, and memory not his own. He staggered, bracing himself against the sensory flood. Images slammed into his mind. Pyraxis chained to a basal pillar, the alloy biting into scaled flesh, wings spread and pinned by energy tethers. Heat not of the planet's making, but from syndicate plasma brands searing its hide. And the sound harsh, guttural laughter in a language Ravik didn't speak, but understood all too well. The taste of betrayal was universal. He gritted his teeth, anchoring himself in the link. "I know," he said under his breath. not sure if the beast could hear the words or just the intent. "I've been there." Pyraxis' movements faltered. The fire in its throat dimmed, replaced by a low, uncertain rumble. The gold in its eyes flickered, confused. Then the moment snapped. A new sound cut through the high-pitched whine of atmospheric thrusters. Ravik broke the link, scanning the sky. 3 Syndicate huntercraft knifed down through the ash clouds, their hulls glinting under the red glare of the volcanoes. "Multiple hostiles inbound," the AI reported. "Heat signatures, heavy weaponry equipped." The first ship swung low, hatches opening. From them fired nets of shimmering blue plasma, arcing through the air in slow, deadly curves. One slammed into Ravik, the force knocking him backward. The net's charge bit into his armor, locking his joints with pulses of electromagnetic shock. He hit the ground hard, the basalt hissing under him. Through the static in his visor, he saw Pyraxis caught in another net, the field constricting around its chest. The beast roared, flames sputtering uselessly as the energy dampened its fire glands. Ravik's fingers twitched toward the cutting tool on his belt, but the net's feedback jolted through him with every movement. "Suit integrity at 60%, the AI warned. "This restraint will not hold against sustained force." "Not the plan?" Ravik growled. He forced his hand to the tool, activated it, and dragged the blade along one strand of the net. Sparks leapt, the smell of scorched alloy mixing with the stench of ozone. The strand parted, and the field destabilized just enough for him to roll free. The hunters above banked for another pass. Ravik didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward Pyraxis, the heat from the beast's struggling body making the air blur. The plasma net around it tightened, drawing a roar of agony. Ravik dove under one of the anchored emitters, slicing through the connection point. The field collapsed in a ripple, and Pyraxis surged upward, snapping the remaining tethers. One broken wing membrane flared before folding tight, shielding its flank from incoming fire. Ravik stumbled back, chest heaving. Pyraxis turned its head toward him, molten eyes narrowing. They stood there, predator and soldier, the battle raging overhead. Another volley of net streaked down. This time Pyraxis swung its head and unleashed a cone of fire that turned the projectiles to molten droplets mid-air. The hunters scattered, engines flaring. Ravik took one step closer, his voice steady despite the pounding in his veins. "I'm not your enemy," he said, low enough. The AI barely picked it up. "But I will be theirs." Pyraxis's gaze lingered, the gold deepening, a flicker of recognition in its posture. Then it turned back to the sky and roared, a sound that shook the ridge to its foundations. The hunters wheeled for distance, clearly rethinking the wisdom of pressing their attack. Ravik knew they'd be back, but for now the net was broken and a seed had been planted. Whether it would grow into an alliance or a death sentence, that would be decided soon. Night on Vulcaris was not cooler, only darker. The rivers of lava still carved their glowing veins through the land, and the air still writhed with heat, but the sky above turned black, pierced only by the sporadic eruptions on the horizon. Ash drifted like slow snow, settling on the jagged terrain. Ravik crouched behind a fractured basalt column, his visor dimmed to filter out the flare from the Syndicate's floodlights. The camp spread below him, a patchwork of metallic platforms anchored into the cooling rock. At the center was a reinforced pen energy barrier shimmered in the heat, and inside the silhouette of Pyraxis lay chained, wings clamped with glowing bands, muzzle locked with a spiked restraint that hissed with each breath. The beast's eyes, even from here, burned faintly in the dark. Ravik's jaw tightened. "AI, status on the perimeter?" 8 patrols, evenly spaced. "Sensors cover all approach vectors except for a 90-degree arc on the western side. Terrain there is unstable. Unstable means usable," Ravik cut in. He checked the charge on his sidearm, then the sync module on his wrist. Its readout pulsed steadily, the neural interface ready. Getting in was a matter of timing. Getting out was the gamble. He waited until 2 patrols passed the west sector, their footfalls receding into the hum of generators. Then he moved. The basalt slope crumbled under his boots, and twice he had to steady himself against the rock's edge, the surface still warm enough to sting even through armor. The unstable ground masked his approach. The Syndicate sensors wouldn't risk placing equipment on shifting stone. Close enough now, he could hear the low growl from the pen, a sound that vibrated through the air rather than cut it. He scaled the last rise and dropped into the shadow of the barrier controls. A single guard stood watch, bored, his weapon slung carelessly. Ravik closed the distance in silence, one hand on the man's shoulder, the other on the sync module. Neural overdrive flared. He let the guard taste, for a single searing second, the moment Ravik's own squad had turned their rifles on him. The man buckled, choking on a scream only he could hear. Ravik caught him as he fell, eased him down, and cut the power to the barriers. The shimmer died. Inside, Pyraxis stirred, eyes snapping toward him. "Easy," Ravik said quietly. He stepped inside, boots scraping the stone. The heat in here was suffocating, amplified by the beast's trapped body. He reached for the restraint's locking node, fingers finding the override. As the muzzle came loose, Pyraxis's breath gusted over him, a blast of furnace air. "Neural link," Ravik told the AI. "Full sync." The connection slammed into him, images, sounds, sensations. He gave Pyraxis what he had given no other, the memory of the moment his oldest friend leveled a rifle at his chest, the disbelief that froze his muscles, the way the shot burned past his shoulder, close enough to scorch but not kill. The sound of betrayal was always louder than the gunshot. Pyraxis recoiled at the surge of emotion, then leaned into it. In return, Ravik felt the beast's agony, the chains biting into muscle, the ripping of wing membranes by syndicate blades, the humiliation of being paraded in front of laughing captors. Pain recognized pain, and something shifted between them. The glow along Pyraxis's throat brightened. Ravik stepped back. "Do it!" The beast erupted. Chains snapped like brittle twigs, molten fragments spinning away. The energy bands shattered under the force of its wings, sending shards into the night. Pyraxis reared, the ground shuddering, then loosed a column of fire so bright it carved shadows into the camp walls. Alarms screamed. Syndicate soldiers poured from their barracks, weapons raised. But the heat rolling from Pyraxis was a wall of its own. Ravik drew his rifle, cutting down two who broke through the firelight. "North flank," the AI warned. He turned to see a team moving in with suppression cannons. "Not today." Pyraxis swept its head, the fire washing over them in a single blinding pass. The cannons melted where they stood. "We're leaving," Ravik called, though the beast needed no prompting. Pyraxis crouched, and in a single leap Ravik was on its back, his hands gripping the base of the neck ridge. The sensation was alien, the shift of muscles the size of walls, the sheer heat, the raw power under him. Pyraxis launched into the air, wings tearing the ash-heavy sky open. Below, the camp was chaos structures collapsing, flames devouring the platforms. Lava vents near the ridge burst, adding their fury to the destruction. The night around them glowed red as they climbed higher. "Hey!" Ravik's visor displayed incoming blips. "We've got one runner," he said, spotting the hunter ship streaking away from the burning camp. "Intercept?" the AI asked. "Intercept." Pyraxis banked, the sudden drop making Ravik's stomach lurch. They closed the gap in seconds, the ship's engines flaring desperately. Ravik tapped the sync, sending a pulse of shared intent. "Hunt." Pyraxis responded with a roar that rattled the ship's hull. As they came alongside, Ravik stood, letting the wind and heat whip past. He leapt, boots slamming onto the hunter's dorsal plating. His mag clamps held him long enough to reach the cockpit. The pilot inside spun, eyes wide, but Ravik smashed through the canopy with a short, brutal burst from his rifle. Glass and air screamed out into the night. He pulled the pilot from the seat, tossing him into the darkness below. Sliding into position, he cut the controls, angling the craft toward the coordinates in his HUD, the secondary syndicate. Outpost less than 5 kilometers away. Pyraxis circled above, watching. "Strap in," Ravik muttered to no one. He jammed the throttle forward and locked it. The ship screamed as it hurtled toward the outpost. At the last moment he ejected, the blast catching him midair. Heat blossomed under him as the hunter craft slammed into the outpost's fuel reserves, the explosion dwarfing the original camp's destruction. Pyraxis swept in beneath him, catching his descent with a powerful updraft from its wings. Ravik landed hard against the beast's back, gripping tight as they soared away from the inferno. Behind them, syndicate comms would already be in chaos. 2 strongholds gone in one night. Ahead, the volcanic horizon stretched, glowing like a battlefield lit by the heart of the planet itself. Ravik didn't speak, but the link hummed between them, a shared understanding forged in the fire. This was no longer just survival. It was war. The floating citadel loomed above the molten river like a black fortress writ from the bones of the planet. Great pylons plunged into the lava below, channeling geothermal energy into humming conduits that pulsed along the structure's spine. Overhead, syndicate banners hung limp in the heat, their emblems half melted by the unforgiving air. Ravik watched from the shadow of a basalt cliff, visor filtering the glare. Pyraxis crouched beside him, the beast's scales reflecting the lava's glow, molten seams along its neck brightening with every slow breath. The AI's voice was calm, but the undertone was grave. "Target confirmed. Commander Dravek. Probability of his presence, 97%. Ravik's jaw tensed at the name. Drevek's voice had been the one in his comm before the betrayal in orbit, the one that had ordered his death without hesitation. "What about civilian presence?" he asked. A pause. "Thermal scans detect multiple humanoid signatures on the central deck. 8 to 12, unarmed. Their movement patterns suggest restraint." "Hostages," Ravik muttered. "They've got human shields." Paraxis shifted, claws digging shallow furrows in the rock. Ravik placed a hand on the ridge of its neck, the contact grounding him. "AI, route me the least fortified approach. Northern pylon access point through maintenance shaft. Minimal patrol, but exposure time will be high." "Exposure's fine," Ravik said, climbing onto Paraxis's back. "We're not here to hide." The beast launched into the air, wings stirring a cyclone of ash and heat. They banked wide, skimming the lava's surface before ascending toward the citadel's underbelly. Spotlights swept the molten expanse, but Pyraxis stayed in the shadows until Ravik signaled the dive. They hit the northern pylon with a clang that echoed through the metal. Ravik dismounted, magnetic boots locking to the structure as Pyraxis clung with talons and tail. He cut into the maintenance hatch, sparks falling into the glow below. The interior was a claustrophobic tube lined with piping, the air heavy with steam. Ravik moved fast, rifle ready, the AI feeding him corridor schematics. 2 guards blocked the access to the main deck. Ravik dropped them before they could speak, 1 shot each to the throat plates. Emerging into the open, he found himself on a steel platform overlooking the heart of the citadel. There, illuminated by the pulsing red light of the lava below, was Drevek. The commander stood tall in black combat armor, helm off, arm off, pale eyes fixed on Ravik with the calm of a man who had planned for this moment. Around him, 9 hostages knelt in a semicircle, wrists bound, a plasma cannon emplacement aimed squarely at them. Drevek's voice carried easily in the heat. "Kaya, you've been busy." 2 outposts in a single night. Impressive. Wasteful, but impressive. Ravik kept moving, his rifle steady. "Let them go." "I could," Drevek said with a smile. "But then, what leverage would I have to keep you from killing me?" The AI whispered in Ravik's ear. "Calculating engagement parameters, success probability for simultaneous target, elimination and hostage rescue, 23%. Drevek seemed to sense it. "I know you, Kale. You live for the kill. That's all you've ever been. You can end this right now. 1 shot, my blood on the floor, your vengeance satisfied. All it costs is them," his head inclined toward the civilians. "Or you can walk away and watch me rebuild." The heat pressed on Ravik's skin like a second armor, sweat stinging the cut above his brow. Neural overdrive stirred at the edges of his mind, tempting him to reach into Drevek's psyche, to drown him in the memories of every life he'd taken. His finger brushed the trigger. The AI spoke again, quieter now. "Time is critical. Hostage vitals show rising stress. Decision required." He breathed out slowly. The image of his squad's betrayal was sharp in his mind. The shot fired by the man he'd once called brother. But another image pushed in, a younger version of himself pulling survivors from a collapsed shelter on Vega 4, feeling the weight of every heartbeat he'd saved. "I used to live to kill," he said aloud, voice low. Voice low. Meant as much for himself as for Drevek. "Aye, but today I'm going to live to save." Drevek's eyes narrowed. "Wrong choice." The cannon's servos whined as it began to power up. "Pyraxis!" Ravik barked. The beast's roar split the air as it surged over the citadel's rim, landing with a crash that buckled the deck. A torrent of fire blasted between the hostages and the soldiers manning the cannon, forcing them to stumble back. Ravik dove into the gap, slashing restraints with his blade, shoving civilians toward the maintenance shaft. Plaster fire ricocheted off Pyraxis' scales as the beast swung its tail, sending 3 syndicate soldiers over the edge into the lava below. "Beat!" Drevek fired at Ravik, the shots grazing armor. Ravik returned fire, forcing the commander into cover. The AI warned. "Energy reading spiking citadel reactor destabilizing." "Good!" Ravik growled, tossing a plasma charge onto the nearest conduit. The explosion ripped through the deck, heat from the lava surging upward in a blast that staggered everyone. Pyraxis moved to shield the last of the hostages as Ravik shoved them toward the exit. Drevek rose from cover, weapon aimed, but Ravik didn't return the shot. Instead, he shot the support strut above Drevek's position. The beam collapsed, forcing the commander back as molten debris rained down. "We have to go," the AI urged. Ravik vaulted onto Pyraxis' back, the beast leaping into the air as the citadel began to sink. Its pylons shearing under the strain. Below, the molten river surged hungrily into the collapsing structure, swallowing metal and fire alike. From the sky, Ravik watched the Syndicate's stronghold disappear beneath the lava, a roar of steam marking its grave. The hostages were safe, scattered along the basalt shore where he dropped them minutes earlier. Drevek was gone. Whether buried in molten rock or escaping through some hidden route, Ravik didn't know. But the choice had been made. As Pyraxis banked away, the heat fading into the distance, Ravik closed his eyes briefly. The link between them hummed with a quiet acknowledgement, not of victory, but of the line he'd chosen to draw. He had come here to kill. He had left having saved lives instead. The lava fields were quiet now, if such a place could ever be called quiet. The roar of the molten river remained, a constant undertone to the world, but the metallic hum of Syndicate machinery was gone. No patrol drones crossed the horizon, no searchlights swept the basalt cliffs. Where once there had been outposts, watchtowers, and prison cages, it was only scorched stone and the slow crawl of magma reclaiming what had been taken from it. Pyraxis wheeled overhead, its massive shadow passing over the blackened ridges, wings cutting smooth arcs through the haze. Each time it roared, the sound rolled for kilometers, a deep, resonant claim of the land beneath. Ravik stood on a promontory jutting over the molten river, the heat curling the air around him. His armor bore the scars of the past nights, plasma scoring, cracked plating, and the faint shimmer of residual heat damage. But the worst of it was inside. Neural overdrive had been pushed beyond any safe threshold during the battles. His vision wavered at times, the edges of his sight tinged with a faint red glow. Once or twice since the Citadel's fall, the glow had flared so bright in his eyes that the AI had flagged it as a warning sign. "Your stress remains critical," the AI said now, its voice softer than usual, as if it knew volume might tip something inside him over the edge. "You require medical intervention." Ravik exhaled slowly, watching the breath fog inside his visor. "Not here," he said. "Not yet." Commander Drevek's signal vanished during the Citadel's collapse, the AI continued. "No confirmation of death." Ravik didn't answer immediately. Drevek's absence was a weight he'd expected to carry. Killing him had been the plan from the beginning, the justification for every risk. But the plan had changed, and Drevek had slipped through the cracks. The fact sat in his mind like a stone heavy, immovable, but no longer the center of gravity. Pyraxis descended, the wind from its wings buffeting him where he stood. The beast landed on the ridge beside him, talons gripping the rock with a sound like steel bending. Its eye, still molten gold, met his for a long moment. There was no aggression there, only recognition. The link between them, dormant since the final fight, stirred faintly at the edges of his mind. He could feel something from Pyraxis, not words, not even images, but a sense of satisfaction, of boundaries reclaimed. Ravik reached out, resting a gauntleted hand against one of the great neck ridges. "It's yours now," he said quietly. The beast's chest rose and fell, then it lifted its head and roared again, the sound echoing through the valleys like a declaration to any who might listen. Volcaris Prime was no longer under Syndicate rule. Mission parameters met, the AI reported. Syndicate infrastructure on this planet has been neutralized. Remaining risk, minimal. Ravik almost laughed, though it came out as more of a tired breath. "Minimal," he echoed. "That's not a word I'd use for this place." His gaze tracked the lava flows winding through the darkness, remembering each battle fought along their edges. The Syndicate had thought this world could be bent to their will, its apex predator chained and broken, its heat harnessed as a weapon. They had learned otherwise. And so had he. The glow in his vision pulsed again, a reminder of the cost. Every use of neural overdrive had pushed the connection between his mind and the nervous systems of others further into dangerous territory. Now, sometimes he could feel the aftershocks without touching anyone, the phantom flare of rage, the ghost pain in muscles, not his own. It was a reminder of how thin the line was between control and destruction. "You are injured," the AI pressed again. "Your refusal to disengage from field operations is statistically correlated with permanent cognitive degradation." Ravik smirked faintly. "You think this is me at full capacity?" "No," the AI said. "But it is not you at zero either. There is still a choice to be made." That word choice caught him. His entire life in the Shadow Division had been a cycle of orders and execution. Choices had been narrowed to targets and methods, the morality of them flattened by the need for survival. But Volcaris had forced him to make a different kind of decision, one that had left his greatest enemy alive because others had needed saving more. The old Ravik would have called it weakness. The man standing here didn't. Pyraxis shifted beside him, the ground trembling under its weight. The beast glanced toward the horizon, where the faintest glimmer of dawn was beginning to cut through the volcanic gloom. Ravik followed its gaze. The Syndicate might regroup elsewhere, Drevik might rise again, but Volcaris was free, and that was enough for now. Sigmund Nish, there, sa, he murmured in his own language, letting the words form fully in his head before speaking them aloud in the common tongue. Isn't the ability to destroy. It's choosing not to when you could. The AI was silent for a moment, as if cataloguing the statement. Pyraxis exhaled, a deep rumble that shook the air. Ravik stepped back, giving the beast room. With a beat of its wings, it rose into the ash-dark sky, circling once over the molten river before vanishing into the clouds of its own territory. Ravik watched until it was gone, the heat from its presence lingering like the last ember of a fire. He turned away from the river and began the slow climb back toward his ship's wreckage. There would be no easy way off this world, but he had time. Time to heal, time to decide what came next. The red flicker in his eyes pulsed once more, but this time it faded without searing. For the first time in days, the neural storm inside him was quiet. The war here was over, and he had walked away not as a weapon, but as a man who had chosen what to protect. In the weeks after the fall of Volcaris Prime, stories began to move along the trade lanes and frontier outposts like wildfire carried on solar winds. They spoke of a man astride a beast of living flame, diving through skies choked with ash, tearing syndicate strongholds apart in nights of fire and vengeance. The name they gave him varied. Some called him the Firebound, others the Ash Rider, but most settled on one, the Fire Rider. In the taverns of fringe colonies, it was a tale told in low, awed tones, often over a cup of something too strong, as if the heat of the drink could bring the heat of that night closer. But the truth behind the legend was far less simple than the story suggested. On a remote station orbiting a mining moon, Ravik sat in the corner of a small repair bay, his armor stripped and leaning against a bulkhead. The flicker of an old holo display lit the edges of his face, casting his eyes in faint red, as if the glow inside them had followed him off Volcaris. Outside, the hum of docked freighters was a steady backdrop. The AI's voice filled the quiet. Transmission intercepts confirm. Your actions on Volcaris have reduced Syndicate presence in the sector by 89%. Not gone, though, Ravik said, his voice low, more thought than conversation. Never gone. Your choice not to eliminate Commander Drevek remains statistically significant. It has altered projected Syndicate strategies. Ravik smirked faintly, though there was no humor in it. You mean they're angry? Correct. He leaned back in the chair, letting the weight of the past days settle into his bones. The images came unbidden. The moment he had Drevik in his sights and didn't take the shot. The heat of Pyraxis's breath beside him, the roar that had covered the civilian's escape. That was the moment the Legends version would never get right. They would say the Fire Rider destroyed everything in his path, that vengeance had been his weapon and fire his ally. But vengeance wasn't what had kept him alive. It was the choice not to take it. Across the bay, a mechanic worked on a battered transport, humming to herself, unaware that the man sitting in the corner had been the center of a war just days ago. Ravik watched her for a moment, then looked back to the AI interface on his gauntlet. Log something, he said. Statement for the record. Recording, the AI confirmed. He took a slow breath, then spoke, his words deliberate, as if etching them into more than just data. Power isn't about controlling the predator. It's about knowing when to let it hunt the right prey. If revenge makes you lose yourself, then let it die with the past. There was silence after, broken only by the mechanic's tools tapping against metal. Statement complete, the AI said. Ravik shut the recording down. Pyraxis was gone now, somewhere over the volcanic ranges of Volcaris, a shadow and a roar no Syndicate patrol dared to challenge. The link between them had faded to a quiet echo in his mind, but it was still there, like the ember of a fire long banked but never fully out. He wondered if the beast remembered that final night as he did. Not as a victory, but as a moment of understanding between two creatures who had been chained and had chosen freedom over destruction. Word of the Fire Rider was already spreading further than he could follow. In the markets of asteroid colonies, merchants sold trinkets shaped like dragons with ember eyes. In the underbelly of smuggler dens, whispers of his name carried a warning to Syndicate sympathizers. Some said he had vanished into the storms of a gas giant. Others that he was hunting Drevik across the spiral arms. None of them would know that the man behind the name was sitting quietly in a repair bay, still weighing the cost of what he had done. The AI broke the quiet again. You understand the question will come. What question? What will you do when the only thing that can save you is the thing you have to sacrifice? Ravik didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to the holo display, which still showed a slow-rolling news feed of border conflicts and trade disputes. Somewhere in the middle of it, Drevik's name would surface again, sooner or later. I don't know. he said finally. "But I know I can choose." Outside, the station's comms pinged with the arrival of a new freighter. The sound pulled him from his thoughts. He stood, the stiffness in his muscles a reminder of the nerve damage that would likely never fully heal. The red flicker in his eyes flared once as he pulled his armor back on. The fire rider would move again, not for vengeance, but for the kind of battles worth the cost. As he stepped out into the main concourse, a merchant caught sight of him and froze for half a heartbeat before bowing slightly. Ravik said nothing, just kept walking. Legends didn't need explanations. They only needed the truth to be known by the ones who mattered, and those were rarely the ones telling the stories. Somewhere, Volcaris' skies still burned with the glow of molten rivers, and somewhere above them, Pyraxis' shadow still swept the ridges, untamed. Ravik let the image sit in his mind as he disappeared into the flow of the crowd, carrying the weight of his choices like a flame he would not let go out.